My name is Sarah. I used to be the daughter who came home to her own room, until I became the sister who didn't belong anywhere. She didn't knock. She never did. When I stepped through the front door after 3 grueling days in Chicago, dragging my suitcase behind me and nursing a headache that felt like it had been carved into my skull, I noticed something wrong immediately. The hallway looked different, cleaner. My nameplate, the wooden one I'd painted in middle school with careful purple letters, was gone from my bedroom door. I stood there for a moment, blinking at the empty space where my name used to be. Maybe Mom had finally decided to redecorate. Maybe she'd gotten tired of the chipped paint and taken it down to touch it up. But when I pushed the door open, my heart dropped through the floor. My room wasn't my room anymore. The walls I'd painted sage green during my sophomore year of high school were still the same color, but everything else had been erased. My desk, the one where I'd written my college application essays, where I'd stayed up until 3 a.m. studying for finals, was gone. In its place sat Emma's vanity, cluttered with makeup I couldn't afford, and skincare products she'd begged our parents to buy her. My bookshelf, packed with novels I'd collected since I learned to read, had been replaced with her art supplies and half-finished canvases. The bed was still there, but it was made with her sheets. Pink and gold, nothing like the navy blue comforter I'd saved up to buy with my first paycheck from the coffee shop downtown. My childhood stuffed animals, my high school yearbooks, my framed photo from graduation. All of it was gone. I backed out of the room like I'd walked into someone else's house by mistake. But this was my house. This was supposed to be my home. Before we continue, drop a comment. Where are you watching this from and what time is it there? I'd love to know how far this story is reaching. Because right now, standing in that hallway, I felt like I was the only person in the world who understood what it meant to disappear from your own life. Emma? I called out, my voice cracking slightly. Mom. In here, honey. Mom's voice drifted from the kitchen, cheerful and light, like nothing had happened. Like my entire existence hadn't just been packed away in storage boxes. I found them around the dinner table. Mom chopping vegetables for what looked like Emma's favorite stir-fry, Dad reading the newspaper, and Emma scrolling through her phone with the same bored expression she'd worn since she turned 16. None of them looked up when I walked in. Where are my things? I asked. Mom glanced up then, her knife pausing mid-chop. Oh, Sarah, you're back early. How was the conference? Where are my things? I repeated. We moved you into the guest room, she said, like she was telling me they'd switched brands of coffee. Emma needed more space for her art projects, and you're barely here anyway with your new job and all those business trips. The words hit me like a slap. You're barely here anyway. As if my absence because I was working, because I was building a career, because I was trying to make something of myself, meant I didn't deserve a place to come home to. You moved me without asking. Dad finally looked up from his newspaper. It just made sense, sweetheart. Emma's taking more art classes, and she needs the natural light from the big window. The guest room is perfectly comfortable. Perfectly comfortable. Like I was a visitor who should be grateful for any bed at all. Emma still hadn't looked up from her phone. Emma, I said, my voice sharper now. Look at me. She sighed dramatically and tilted her head in my direction. Not quite, meeting my eyes. What? That was my room. Was, she said, shrugging. Now it's mine. I'm actually using it for something important. Important. As if the 22 years I'd lived in that room, the nights I'd cried myself to sleep after bad breakups, the mornings I'd practiced violin before school, the hours I'd spent writing in my journal and dreaming about my future. None of that was important. I looked at my parents, waiting for them to say something. Waiting for them to tell Emma that she couldn't just take what wasn't hers. That families didn't work that way, that I mattered too. But Mom had gone back to chopping vegetables, and Dad had returned to his newspaper. The conversation was over. I walked upstairs to the guest room, my new room apparently, and found my life crammed into cardboard boxes. My childhood trophies from debate team and honor roll certificates were stacked in a plastic bin, marked Sarah's Awards in Mom's neat handwriting. My books were boxed up and shoved into the closet. My violin case sat propped against the wall, like an afterthought. The bed was one of those fold-out kinds that creaked every time you moved. The sheets were generic blue, hotel standard, nothing like the soft cotton ones I'd bought for my real bed. My real bed that was now Emma's bed. I sat down on the edge of the mattress and tried not to cry. I tried to tell myself that it was just a room, that it didn't matter where I slept. But it did matter. It mattered because it was mine, and they'd given it away like I was already gone. That night at dinner, they talked about Emma's upcoming art show at school, about Dad's promotion at work, about Mom's book club. They asked me how the conference went, but only in the polite way you ask strangers about their day. When I mentioned landing a potential new client, Dad nodded absently and asked Emma to pass the salt. I excused myself early and went upstairs to my temporary room. I pulled out one of my old journals from a box and started writing, trying to capture how it felt to be erased from your own family. But every time I tried to find the words, all I could think was, "You're barely here anyway." Maybe they were right. Maybe I had been pulling away, throwing myself into work to avoid the slow suffocation of being the daughter who was always second best. Maybe I had been gone too much, traveling for conferences and staying late at the office and building a life that didn't revolve around Sunday dinners and family game nights. But I'd been building that life for them too. I'd been working toward something that would make them proud, that would prove I was worth the investment they'd made in my education. I'd been trying to become the kind of daughter who could take care of them when they got older, who could contribute something meaningful to the world. Instead, I'd become the daughter who didn't need a room. The weeks that followed blurred together in a haze of hurt feelings and forced politeness. I started coming home later and later, finding excuses to stay at the office until the cleaning crew arrived. I took on extra projects, volunteered for every business trip my boss offered, anything to avoid walking into that house and seeing Emma's art supplies scattered across my old desk. When I was home, I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. Emma had rearranged the furniture, hung her paintings on walls where my photos used to be, turned my sanctuary into her studio. She'd even replaced my mirror, the one where I'd practiced my presentations and given myself pep talks before job interviews, with one surrounded by Hollywood-style light bulbs. The message was clear. Your presence is optional. Your space is disposable. I started eating breakfast at the coffee shop down the street from work instead of sitting at the kitchen table with my family. I did my laundry at the laundromat instead of using the washer and dryer at home, because I couldn't stand the way Mom would move my clothes aside to make room for Emma's delicate artist scarves that had to be air-dried. Slowly, I began to disappear from their daily routines. And the most heartbreaking part was that no one seemed to notice. 3 months after the room incident, I found my own apartment. It was small, barely bigger than my old bedroom, but it was mine. Every square inch belonged to me, and no one could take it away or decide I didn't deserve it. I told my parents I was moving out over dinner on a Tuesday night, the same casual way Mom had told me about the room switch. "That's nice, honey," Mom said, not looking up from her plate. "Will you still come for Sunday dinners?" I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. Instead, I said, "We'll see." Emma finally looked up from her phone. "Can I have your old parking spot in the driveway?" That night, I packed the last of my things from the guest room. My parents were watching TV downstairs, and Emma was in my old room, her room now, working on some project that was apparently more important than 22 years of my life. No one came upstairs to help me carry boxes. No one asked if I needed anything. As I loaded my car, I found myself looking up at the window that used to be mine. The light was on, and I could see Emma moving around inside, probably arranging her canvases or organizing her art supplies. She looked happy. She looked like she belonged. I drove to my new apartment that night with a carload of boxes and a heart full of questions I couldn't answer. How do you become invisible to the people who are supposed to love you most? How do you disappear from a family without ever really leaving? But as I unlocked the door to my own place, my place, where my name was on the lease and my furniture would stay exactly where I put it, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. I felt like I could breathe again. I unpacked slowly, deliberately. I hung my photos on the walls where I wanted them. I arranged my books on shelves that no one would reorganize. I set up my violin in the corner where it would be safe from younger sisters who thought everything was theirs for the taking. And for the first time since I'd walked into that empty hallway, I started to remember who I used to be. The girl who had dreams and dignity, and a voice that deserved to be heard. The girl who was building something meaningful, something lasting, something that couldn't be packed away in cardboard boxes and forgotten. I opened my laptop and started working on a presentation for the next day's meeting. As I typed, I realized something that made me sit up straighter in my chair. I was good at my job. Really good. I was respected by my colleagues, trusted by my clients, valued by my boss. At work, I wasn't the daughter who was barely there. I was the employee they couldn't do without. That realization sparked something in me, a quiet fire that had been smoldering under months of hurt feelings and silent rage. If my family couldn't see my worth, maybe it was time to focus on the people who could. Maybe it was time to stop trying to earn a place at their table and start building my own. I threw myself into work with a determination that surprised even me. I arrived early, stayed late, and volunteered for every challenging project that crossed my desk. When my boss mentioned that our biggest client was considering switching to a competitor, I spent my weekend crafting a presentation that not only kept them, but secured a 3-year contract extension. When the marketing department needed someone to lead a cross-functional team, I raised my hand before anyone else could speak. My colleagues began to notice. "Sarah's the one who gets things done," they'd say. "Sarah's the one you want on your team. Sarah's the one who never drops the ball." It felt like stepping into sunlight after months of living in shadows. 6 months after moving out, I got promoted to senior account manager. The raise was substantial enough that I could finally afford to furnish my apartment properly, not with hand-me-downs and garage sale finds, but with pieces I actually chose. I bought a real dining table, not because I had anyone to eat with, but because I deserved to eat my meals somewhere other than a folding TV tray. I started taking evening classes in digital marketing, learning skills that made me even more valuable. At work, I joined a professional women's networking group and met mentors who saw potential in me that my own family had somehow missed. These women, successful executives and entrepreneurs, treated my ideas with respect, asked for my opinions, remembered my name. For the first time in my adult life, I felt seen. The silence from home was deafening, but I'd stopped waiting for their calls. When Mom texted occasionally to ask how I was doing, I'd respond politely, but briefly. When Dad sent me a forwarded joke or a news article he thought I'd find interesting, I'd react with a thumbs up and nothing more. They'd trained me well. I was barely there, so I became barely there. Emma never reached out at all, which shouldn't have surprised me but somehow still stung. I wondered if she ever thought about the sister whose room she'd claimed, whose photos she'd taken down, whose presence she'd erased so casually. Probably not. Emma had always been good at taking what she wanted without looking back. A year into my new life, something interesting happened at work. Our company had been growing rapidly, and we needed to expand our communications team. My boss, Patricia, asked me to sit in on the interviews for a new communications specialist position, since I'd be working closely with whoever they hired. "We've got some promising candidates," Patricia told me as she handed me a stack of resumes. "Take a look through these and let me know what you think." I flipped through the applications, making notes about each candidate's experience and qualifications. Marketing degree from State University, previous internship at a local PR firm, proficiency in social media management. Standard stuff. Nothing that jumped out as exceptional. Then I reached the fourth resume, and my coffee cup froze halfway, to my lips. Emma Richardson. My maiden name stared back at me from the top of the page, neat and professional in Times New Roman font. Emma had graduated from college. When had that happened? With a degree in communications and media studies. She'd done an internship at a boutique marketing agency downtown and had apparently been freelancing for small local businesses. The resume was impressive, I had to admit. Well formatted, grammatically correct, filled with action verbs and quantifiable achievements. She'd learned how to market herself, how to make her limited experience sound substantial and valuable. But I could read between the lines. The comprehensive social media campaigns were probably Instagram posts for her friends' small businesses. The brand development projects were likely logos she'd designed in exchange for free coffee or store credit. Still, it was more than I'd expected from my little sister who used to beg me to do her homework. "This candidate looks interesting," Patricia said, pointing to Emma's resume. "Local graduate, seems hungry, probably won't demand a huge salary. Plus, Richardson, any relation to you?" I stared at the paper, at my sister's name in black and white, applying for a job at my company. The company where I'd built my reputation, where I'd earned respect, where I was known and valued and seen. The irony was so perfect it almost made me laugh. "Same last name before I got married," I said carefully. "But no relation." It wasn't, technically, a lie. The girl who used to share that name, who used to live in my childhood home, who used to believe family meant something, she didn't exist anymore. "Great. Let's bring her in for an interview." The interview was scheduled for the following Thursday. I spent the week in a strange state of anticipation, wondering if Emma would recognize my married name on the company directory, if she'd done any research about the team she'd potentially be joining. Probably not. Emma had never been one for details. Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. I dressed carefully, my best navy suit, the one that made me look authoritative without being intimidating. I wanted to look exactly like what I was, someone who belonged in this building, in this role, in this life I'd built for myself. Patricia and I were sitting in the conference room when Emma walked in, and I had to grip my pen tighter to keep my hand steady. She looked older, more polished than I remembered. Her hair was styled in a sleek bob instead of the messy waves she'd worn throughout high school. She was wearing a blazer I'd never seen before, probably borrowed from a friend or bought specifically for this interview. But her walk was the same. That confident stride that said the world owed her something. That same easy assumption that things would work out because they always had. She shook Patricia's hand first, then turned to me with a professional smile that died on her lips the moment our eyes met. "Sarah?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "Hello, Emma." I kept my voice level professional. "Please, have a seat." She sat down slowly, like she was moving through water. Her eyes kept darting between me and Patricia, trying to process what was happening. I could practically see the wheels turning in her head, connecting dots she'd never bothered to notice before. I didn't know you worked here," she said. "I've been here for 3 years," I replied. "I'm senior account manager. I'll be supervising whoever we hire for this position." The color drained from her face. She'd walked into this interview expecting to charm her way into an entry-level job at some random company. Instead, she'd stumbled into my world, my territory, my domain. Patricia cleared her throat. "Shall we begin? Emma, tell us why you're interested in this position." For the next 30 minutes, I watched my sister try to salvage an interview that had gone sideways before it even started. She stumbled over questions about her experience, gave vague answers about her career goals, and kept glancing at me, like she was waiting for me to rescue her the way I used to when we were kids. But I wasn't a kid anymore. And this wasn't a game. This was my professional reputation, my workplace, my career. And Emma was just another candidate who wasn't quite qualified enough. When she talked about her extensive experience managing social media accounts, I asked for specific metrics. When she mentioned her successful freelance projects, I requested details about budget management and client retention. When she claimed to be highly organized and detail-oriented, I asked about her project management systems and quality control processes. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't unfair. I asked the same questions I would ask any candidate, applied the same standards I would apply to anyone seeking to join our team. The fact that Emma couldn't answer them adequately wasn't my fault. "Do you have any questions for us?" Patricia asked as the interview wound down. Emma looked directly at me for the first time since she'd sat down. Will you be making the final hiring decision?" "It's a team decision," I said. "But yes, my recommendation carries significant weight." She nodded slowly, understanding exactly what that meant. After she left, Patricia turned to me with raised eyebrows. "Well, that was awkward. I take it you do know her?" "We grew up in the same house," I said. "But like I mentioned, no relation." Patricia laughed. "Gotcha. Well, what did you think?" She seemed nervous, but that's normal for interviews. I looked down at my notes, at the careful observations I'd made throughout the conversation. Inexperienced, unprepared, overconfident without substance to back it up, unable to provide concrete examples of success or growth. "I think we can do better," I said. We interviewed 6 more candidates over the next 2 weeks, and ultimately hired a recent graduate from the state university who had impressive internship experience and could answer our questions with specific examples and measurable results. She was hungry, smart, and humble enough to know what she didn't know. Everything Emma wasn't. I heard through Mom's occasional texts that Emma hadn't gotten the job, though she didn't know I'd been involved in the decision. According to Mom, Emma was disappointed but looking at other opportunities. Dad mentioned that she'd seemed upset about something, but wouldn't talk about it. I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because for once, Emma hadn't gotten something just because she wanted it. Sadness because she was still my sister, even if she'd never acted like I was hers. But mostly, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Justice. Quiet, professional, completely fair justice. 3 months later, I was promoted again, this time to communications director, overseeing the entire department, including the new hire who'd gotten the job Emma wanted. My salary had doubled since leaving home, and I'd been asked to speak at industry conferences about innovative client retention strategies. The night I got the promotion, I sat in my apartment, my beautiful, carefully chosen apartment, where every piece of furniture was exactly where I wanted it, and opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. I toasted to the empty room, to the silence that used to hurt, but now felt peaceful. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was Emma. "I know what happened. I know you could have helped me get that job." I stared at the message, for a long time, considering my response. I could explain that I'd evaluated her fairly, that her qualifications simply weren't competitive. I could point out that she'd never asked for my help, that she'd never even acknowledged taking my room or pushing me out of my own family. I could remind her that help was something you asked for, not something you demanded after the fact. Instead, I deleted the message without responding. A week later, another text. "Mom says you got promoted. Congratulations, I guess." Delete. Then, a month after that, "Are you ever coming home for Sunday dinner? They keep asking about you." I stared at that one longer. They keep asking about you. Not "I miss you," not "we want you here." They keep asking, like my absence was an inconvenience to be managed rather than a loss to be mourned. Delete. My apartment had a small balcony that faced west, and on clear evenings I could watch the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. I'd taken to sitting out there with my coffee in the mornings and my wine in the evenings, watching the world wake up and settle down without me having to justify my place in it. One evening, as I was grading project proposals from my new team, members, my phone rang. Mom's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail like I had the past few times she'd called. But something made me answer. "Hi, Mom. Sarah, I'm so glad you picked up. How are you, sweetheart?" The endearment felt foreign, like she was speaking a language she'd forgotten how to use properly. "I'm good. Busy with work." "That's wonderful. Listen, I wanted to ask you something. Emma's been having a hard time finding a job, and I know you work for a big company now. Do you think there might be any openings for her?" I closed my eyes and counted to 5. Even now, even after everything, they still didn't understand. They still saw me as someone who existed to make Emma's life easier, to clear obstacles from her path, to give her what she wanted. "There aren't any openings right now," I said. "Well, could you keep an ear out? Maybe put in a good word for her? I'll let you know if anything comes up." It was the most diplomatic way I could think of to say no without having to explain why. "Thank you, honey. You know, we really miss having you around. The house feels so quiet without you." Quiet without me. The girl who was barely there anyway, who didn't deserve her own room, who could be moved and rearranged like furniture whenever it was convenient. Now they missed the noise I made. "I miss it too," I said, and I wasn't entirely lying. I missed the home I thought I'd had, the family I thought I belonged to. I just didn't miss the reality of what it had actually been. After I hung up, I sat on my balcony and watched the sun disappear behind the buildings across the street. My phone buzzed with work emails from colleagues asking for my input on important decisions, my opinion on strategic directions, my approval on budget allocations. People who valued what I had to say, who respected my expertise, who saw me as essential rather than optional. I opened my laptop and responded to each email thoughtfully, adding insights and asking follow-up questions that would move projects forward. This was my world now. A world where my voice mattered, where my presence was requested rather than tolerated, where my name was on the door because I'd earned it. Later that night, I pulled out one of my old journals and started writing. Not about the hurt or the anger, but about the unexpected gift Emma had given me when she took my room. She'd forced me to leave, to build something of my own, to discover who I was when I wasn't trying to fit into a space that was never really mine to begin with. I wrote about the job interviews I'd aced, the presentations that had earned standing, ovations, the clients who trusted me with their most important projects. I wrote about the apartment that was truly mine, the career that I'd built from scratch, the respect I'd earned through competence rather than birthright. And I wrote about justice. Not the loud, dramatic kind that comes with confrontations and ultimatums, but the quiet kind that arrives when you stop waiting for others to see your worth and start demonstrating it for yourself. I closed the journal and looked around my living room. Tomorrow I would get up in my own bed, shower in my own bathroom, make coffee in my own kitchen, and drive to a job where people knew my name and valued my contributions. I would continue building the life I'd created for myself. The life no one could take away or reassign or decide I didn't deserve. They had deleted my name from the family roster, but not from my story.